welcome back to my channel. It's Christina from Our Home. I'm going to be showing you in this video how to make your very own sourdough starter from scratch. At the time of filming this video, I'm going to be starting on day 1 of the sourdough starter creation, so it might take a few weeks before this video is actually released to you, but don't worry, it's going to be very straightforward and simple, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what you have to do to make your very own sourdough starter at home. I know it can be a little bit intimidating, so I'm hoping that after you watch this video and have a little bit more information, you'll feel more confident getting your own starter set and that you'll be able to enjoy baking once it's fully mature. So what you're going to need is a food-safe jar or container that you can put a lid or cover on. I'm just going to use a wide mouth canning jar. If you are going to use a mason jar or a canning jar of some kind, I would suggest a wide mouth as opposed to a normal mouth. The wide mouth is just going to be easier for mixing. And I'm using a 500 milliliter size, and I think this is a fine size to use. You're also going to need some flour, water. Non-chlorinated is best. You don't have to use bottled water. If you already buy bottled water, go ahead and use it, but I just use well water. It has been treated with softener salt, and it also goes through a UV and sediment filter. If you have another type of filtration system on your water, feel free to use that as well. Just not chlorinated water, as it can just affect the starter's overall health. If you only have chlorinated water, I suggest maybe buying some just specifically for feeding your starter, or do some research on how to get the chlorine out of your water if that's something you would prefer to do. You're also going to need something to cover your jar. I use homemade jar covers with an elastic, and they just easily fit over the mouth of the jar. If you have scrap fabric, you can also use that over the jar with an elastic band. You can also just use a piece of plastic wrap that's loosely covering it. The point of the cover on your jar is to make sure that dust and any flies, fruit flies, etc., can't get into your starter, but that it's still able to breathe and release some of those gases. So that's why I prefer to do a fabric cover instead of a piece of plastic or something. I have seen people use their canning lids upside down. So you'd take the flat lid, turn it upside down, put the ring on, and put that on your jar, and it can allow enough air to move through. But honestly, I really just suggest using some fabric. Now let's get ready to actually make the starter. Let me just find a good angle for this. I think that's okay. So you're going to take your clean, dry jar, and to that add 1/4 cup of flour. I'm just using white flour, all-purpose flour. And then add your 1/4 cup of water and give this a mix. I'm using just a miniature spatula scraper. You can use a spoon or a bigger spatula, whatever you'd like. I just think that a scraper or spatula is a bit better because it's flat, so you don't have to worry about trying to get off all of the mixture from a rounded spoon when you're finished. Make sure you mix it very well so that the flour is all moistened. Make sure you get down to the bottom of that jar or container as well. We just don't want any dry pieces of flour. So this is all nice and mixed up. Now we're going to put our cover over it, and that's it. We're going to just set this somewhere out of the way and let it sit for 12 hours. And then in 12 hours, we'll come back and do another step. After 12 hours, we are going to take the cover off and add 1/4 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water to this, and make sure that it's mixed very, very well. And then we'll put the cover on it and leave it for another 12 hours. Good morning, everyone. It is day 2 of our sourdough starter. This is 24 hours since I first created the starter. So the next step is to scoop out half of the mixture that's in the jar, and that's called the discard. And then we're going to add 1/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of flour to that. Now you can just throw away the discard, but I like to save it and bake with it later. I believe I have a video talking about the discard, so I will link that somewhere across the screen at some point. So here's our starter jar. Let's take the lid off. I also have a container for the discard, which just lives in my fridge. Before discarding any part of the starter, let's just give that a good mix. And you don't have to get exactly half of it out, just approximately half. Okay, that looks about half. So I'm going to set this container aside, bring this back in, and now we're going to do our 1/4 flour and 1/4 water. 1/4 cup of water and flour, sorry. I should be more specific. Now the water that you're using, as I said in the previous clip, should be non-chlorinated. You also don't want it to be hot water or cold water. Kind of just room temperature or warm is what we're going for. Make sure you're giving this a really good mix, scraping around the bottom and all the sides to make sure that flour is really well incorporated and moistened. All right, now we're going to put the cover on, and we will check back in another 12 hours. It is the end of day 2, so let's feed our starter again. In the evenings, we're not discarding, we're just feeding. So let's get our 1/4 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water. And once again, mix that until it's thoroughly incorporated and there's no dry flour in there. Those pitiful meows in the background are from my kitten Mish. She just wants some attention and she wants to play. So once I mix this, I'll go do that. But don't worry, she's fine. She's just really good at sounding pitiful. All right, so this is mixed. Let's put our cover back on and set this aside. We'll check in tomorrow on day 3. Good morning. It is day 3 of our sourdough starter. I'll be honest, I'm not a morning person. I'm not a night owl, but I'm just not a morning person. I didn't even fix my hair, hence my toque. Plus, it's cold outside, so it works both ways. So now we are going to go back to our starter, and we're going to scoop out half of what is currently in the jar, and then we're going to add our 1/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of flour. So let's go do that together. I'm just going to speed this part up because it's pretty straightforward, but we're going to mix and then empty half of those contents into our discard jar, Then we're going to add 1/4 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water to the starter jar, mixing well and putting the cover back on. Hello everyone, it is 12 hours later. We're going to feed our starter. Again, 1/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of flour. Now we're just going to keep doing this for 5 weeks total until our starter is mature. I will check in with you guys later and we'll talk a little bit more about the next steps. And again, if you hear that meowing, it's my kitten, Mish. She's very vocal. But let's get this fed again. So before feeding it, I like to just give it a little mix. And we're doing 1/4 cup of flour. Quarter cup water. Once I'm done mixing this, I'm gonna go pick up Mish and bring her over to the camera so you can see her because she is adorable. This is getting very thick, and that's fine, that's what we want. Cover this up. Now let me see if I can go bring Mish over. Oh, she does not like being carried and moved around, but here's Mish. Say hi, Mish. No. Here is what my starter is looking like now. It's kind of hard to see because I'm in a shadow and I can't find a good spot without tilting the jar, but you can see it's got lots of nice bubbles, which means lots of nice healthy activity. One thing I'm often asked is, do I need to change the jar that I keep my starter in? Personally, I do, because as you can see, it does get pretty crunchy just from the flour and water sticking to the sides of the jar. And of course, I try to always scrape that down, but it does stick and it just keeps building up and building up. So what I do is when my jar starts to look like this, I will change it into a new jar. So I'll begin by mixing up the starter and discarding half of it, and then I pour the remainder into a clean jar and then feed it from there. I'm using the same size jar just because it's easier for me. But first, let's empty half of the starter. Roughly half. Set that aside. And dump the remainder into the clean jar. Of course, you don't have to do this. If you want your starter to live its entire life inside the same container, that's totally up to you. Now let's get our flour for it. I'm just going to dump it in over the sink because I feel like it always makes a mess on the counter. Water next. And of course, mix it very well. You should know by now we don't want any flour chunks in there. We want it all nicely moistened and incorporated. Make sure to scrape the sides of the container and the bottom. And of course, we want to make sure we scrape off our stirring tool So I'm scraping that off on the sides and then just trying to get it all back in the jar. Now let's put the cover back on. I don't know if you could hear that, but there is some dried starter on the inside of this cover. So I am going to put it back on, but I'm also going to make sure that I've got a clean starter cover just for the next feeding, because I just want a nice clean one. We are now 5 weeks since the creation of this sourdough starter, which means that it's mature and ready for baking bread. If I was to use this before 5 weeks, there's a chance that it might not be strong enough to actually rise the dough. And I guess I could have experimented and tried to bake prior to 5 weeks, but I don't want to risk anything turning out badly and it just being a waste. So I think waiting the 5 weeks is the best way to go. Then you know for sure your starter is going to be mature and active and ready for baking. Thank you for coming along with me for this making your own sourdough starter video. I hope that you found it interesting and informative. I should also say that this is just one way to make a starter. I'm sure if you're to do some research, you're going to find so many options, so many tutorials, but this is the one that I of course recommend because it's the way I've been making my sourdough starters. I made my first starter in April 2020. After somebody gave me some starter and I didn't know what I was doing. I ended up killing it. So I decided enough of this. I'm just gonna try it on my own from scratch and see what happens. Since then, I have made multiple other sourdough starters from scratch to give to family members. And of course, I have made this one for the sake of this tutorial. Again, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to look around at some of my other videos on my channel, and if you like what you see, I hope that you consider subscribing. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.